in a couple of weeks there will be a major global conference on the environment, the United Nations conference. What do we need to know right now about climate change and its effects on the planet? Here to discuss that topic with us is Joe Romm. Joe Romm is the author of the new book, Climate Change, What Everyone Needs to Know. He is a physicist, a climate expert, and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He oversees the blog climateprogress.org. He's a former acting assistant secretary at the U.S. Department of Energy. He knows about this stuff inside and out, and once again, he joins us now. So, Joe Romm, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So, I got to say, I've started to read your book now, and as someone who considers themselves reasonably well-informed on the issue, even on a topic like, for example, sea level changes, rises in sea level, there are things I didn't know. So I guess let's start with the global picture. Why did you write this book?
Well, I think that, first of all, everyone does need to know about climate change now. 10 years ago, a lot of it was theoretical. Scientists said, if we keep pouring carbon pollution in the atmosphere, we're going to get melting glaciers, rising seas, extreme weather, and all that. Now we're starting to see it, and it's going to affect every single person listening to this broadcast. It's going to affect people who own coastal property because, we can see that coastal property is going to crash in prices sometime in the foreseeable future. It's going to affect people who, have kids who want to study different subjects. What should they study to be prepared for and employable in a world that in the coming decades is going to have a climate that changes more and more over time? It's going to affect your investments, where you retire. So, I think that we've now reached a stage where everybody needs to know the basics about climate change because it's going to affect them and their family more than, as I say in the book, the Internet has.
Right. You made that analogy in the book, and I think it's a striking one. You basically said, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that something to the effect of 30 years ago, the Internet was something that we could kind of abstractly imagine would change everybody's life. Now we can picture it on a daily basis, and that's what's going to happen with climate change, right?
Absolutely. And imagine if you had known 30 years ago what was going to happen. If you were in school, you might have made a decision to study something different. All sorts of decisions might have been different along the way. And there were people who did know that, and, they studied electrical engineering and computer science and went to work for Microsoft and then obscure companies like Google and Facebook. So I think that we're in an unusual situation, maybe the first time in world history, where, I can tell you with pretty high confidence what things are going to happen in the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And I think the people who are aware of that are going to be, as I say in the book, the smart money rather than the other kind.
And, just to be clear, when we talk about what's going to happen in 10, 20, 30 years, obviously, our world governments may decide to respond more or less aggressively to this crisis and this situation, but that we're going to see change no matter what, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, people have to understand that we have dawdled for so long. I mean, scientists have been warning about this and telling us to take action for literally 25 years. And, like a patient who goes into the doctor, who's a cigarette smoker, let's say, and comes in with a mild cough, and the doctor says, you should stop smoking. And then, 10 years later, you show up and you've got, emphysema or early stage emphysema, and then, you're still smoking, and the doctor says, well, you better stop smoking now, or, it's just going to get worse. So that's the situation we're in. We are going to see, we're seeing now serious impacts, and a certain amount of change is cooked into the system for the next 10 and 20 years or so. How bad it gets for our children is still in our control, and we still have in our control the ability to keep things from getting, really dangerously bad and catastrophically bad, but we're going to have to take serious action now. But, my point in writing this book, what everyone needs to know, is not to get people politically active. It'd be great if they, decided they wanted to, but the point of this book is everybody needs to be able to participate in the conversation and understand how the future is going to affect them economically today and in the coming years.
We're talking to Romm, author of Climate Change, What Everyone Needs to Know, scientist and policy expert in this area. Joe, it seems to me that one of the things that happens psychologically when climate change comes up as a topic is that people can understand intellectually. Of course, we have a whole segment of the population that doesn't, and we'll talk about that. But a certain category of person may understand intellectually that that this is happening, that it's real, that there's going to be a change in sea levels, and so on. And yet they will then go out and, let's say, buy oceanfront property in South Florida or whatever, as if they didn't know what they know, or as if they can't internalize the information they've been given. Is that a phenomenon you think is real and needs to be addressed?
Yeah, no, I think it is real. There's certainly no question that the public at large understands this is a serious problem. I do think that scientists haven't been great at communicating that this isn't a distant problem in time and space. It's here now, and so yes, I think a lot of people are not internalizing the reality, and there are sort of two good examples. One is the sea level rise issue. You're exactly right. I mean, the Miami real estate market, if you Google it, it's just unbelievable. These $40 million, $25 billion condos and rapid and still rising prices. Whereas if you could talk to the head of the oceanography department at the University of Miami, who says there aren't going to be many people living in Southeast Florida at the end of the century. So sometime in the next 10, 20 years or so, the dam is going to burst. And whether it is a Hurricane Sandy hitting Miami, whether it is simply the smart money saying, geez, we've waited too late, and we don't think this is a good investment. It could be banks refusing to offer 30-year mortgages. But at some point, yes, coastal properties, which have been inflated by government policies, are going to come tumbling down. I mean, one of the points I make in the book is you, me, all the people living, the taxpayers of the United States, are currently subsidizing this coastal property bubble through the National Flood Insurance Program. It would not be possible for homes along the coast to get private flood insurance. It simply wouldn't be possible. There is over $1 trillion in federally insured property, of which $500 billion is in Florida alone. And if a Superstorm Sandy, or I should say when, because it's pretty inevitable, hits South Florida, then you and I, the state will declare bankruptcy. Any private insurer who is involved is going to declare bankruptcy, and you and I are going to have to bail everyone out. But, clearly we're not going to keep doing that, and at some point the National Flood Insurance Program is going to go away, and the only people who will be able to buy coastal property are rich people who can pay cash and who can afford to lose their entire home in a storm, which obviously most of us can't and wouldn't want to.
Right. And since you mentioned Superstorm Sandy, well, first of all, it's a two-part question. One, Joe Romm, was that now seen as a phenomenon of climate change?
Yeah, and I have a what I hope is a very readable explanation in the book of what aspects of climate change were affected by Sandy and to what degree. We know for sure two things. One is sea levels are almost a foot higher in the Northeast and around the globe, but actually sea levels are rising faster in the Northeast. And that 1 foot resulted in a great deal more property being flooded, and it makes any storm surge worse. Secondly, you have the rising temperatures. That heat causes water to evaporate from the oceans. That puts more water vapor in the air, and huge storms, and Sandy was the largest hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic, sweeps in all that moisture from the atmosphere, and then it dumps it in these more intense deluges. So, yeah, we know that warming made Superstorm Sandy more deadly and more destructive. Now, there's also, a lot of research showing why did Sandy stay so strong as it marched all the way up to New York rather than cool down? And part of the reason was coastal waters were unusually warm, and part of that was global warming.
And last question, Sandy, the Hurricane Sandy takes me to these reports that have suggested that much of lower Manhattan could eventually be underwater. What's the story there?
Well, look, sea levels are rising, and we don't know the future for certain, but all of the science, all of the observations show that huge amounts of landlocked ice in the West Antarctic ice sheet and Greenland are disintegrating faster than we thought. So many the world's experts that I interviewed for this book, they believe that, by the end of the century, we're going to see sea levels that are 4, 5, or 6 feet higher. Now, that's going to threaten a lot of coastal areas directly, but then on top of that, you get storms. So, you can imagine what would happen if you get a serious nor'easter in the Northeast or a hurricane in the South on top of 4 or 5 feet of sea level. And studies by the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration suggest that if we keep on that path, then, in the second half of the century, you're going to see Hurricane Sandy level storm surges every other year.
And I can tell you this as a non-scientist, that you go to Battery Park City in lower Manhattan, walk around the waterfront there, it doesn't look like there's a lot of leeway for additional sea level rises and storms, as an amateur's observation. Now, the blog that you oversee, the climateprogress.org, we've got this conference coming up outside Paris shortly, less than 2 weeks from now. And one of your contributors did a piece, why you should feel optimistic about a global climate deal. Should we feel optimistic not just about the meeting, but about what the governments of the world are going to do? Or I know you said this is not a political book, but what do you think? Is optimism?
Sure, no, absolutely. And the book, certainly anyone who wants to get up to speed on climate, to understand what the news means, what to have conversations, it's in the book. This is every year for the last 21 years, there has been a conference of the parties, the members to this UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the goal is to the goal has been to limit total carbon pollution, total greenhouse gas emissions from all major sources. And for the first time ever, this one is going to get is getting major attention and serious pledges from all of the world's leading countries. And I think that is, a really important thing. So even China, for the first time ever, China is going to cap emissions in the next 10 or 15 years, and it's already peaking in coal use. So people should feel optimistic that for the first time ever, there is going to be a global agreement in which every country agrees we need to reduce emissions. Most of them have pledged to do so, and And so, that's very positive. Now, people need to understand this doesn't solve the problem because
Right.
every country ultimately has to go to zero by the second, by between, mid 2050 and 2100. So we have a long task ahead of us. This agreement only has pledges, commitments by countries through the year 2030. After this, we're going to have more meetings where countries make pledges for the year 2040 and for the year 2050, and emissions have to go down and down and down. But obviously, you have to start somewhere, and this is going to be the first one of all those meetings that is actually going to change the trajectory of global emissions.
So we have a range of let me state this, Joe Romm, author of Climate Change, What Everyone Needs to Know. The way I would look at that then is, okay, we have this range of possible futures out there on the climate. It's going to be tough because we procrastinated, but as the result of this upcoming deal, that needle is going to be moved in the right direction, but we got to keep pushing for much more substantial change to keep moving it even further and to minimize the catastrophes of the future. Is that a fair summary?
That's exactly right, yes.
All right. Well, listen, thanks so much for coming on the program. Thanks for writing this very important book, Climate Change, What Everyone Needs to Know. Dr. Joseph Romm, physicist, climate expert, senior fellow at American Progress. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.